My name is Penelope. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my father was invincible. Richard Hartwell wasn't just a businessman. He was a force of nature. He built Hartwell Industries from the ground up in the early 80s, turning a small manufacturing company in Pittsburgh into a multi-million-dollar empire. Growing up in our sprawling estate in Shadyside, I watched him command rooms full of executives, close deals over dinner, and shape the industrial landscape of Pennsylvania with nothing but his will and his words. I idolized him. Every evening, when he'd come home smelling of expensive cologne and cigar smoke, I'd wait by the door with my little briefcase, a pink plastic thing I'd gotten for my 8th birthday. I'd follow him into his study, sit across from his massive oak desk, and pretend to take notes while he reviewed contracts. He'd ruffle my hair and call me his little shadow. Back then, I thought that meant something. I thought it meant he saw potential in me. I was wrong. The moment everything changed happened on a crisp October afternoon when I was 23. I had just graduated from Carnegie Mellon with a degree in business administration, finishing in the top 10% of my class. I was brimming with ideas, energy, and ambition. I had spent my final semester developing a business plan for an e-commerce platform. This was 1996, and the internet was still finding its footing, but I could see the future clearly. I wanted to create an online marketplace for artisan goods, connecting small creators with customers across the country. I remember walking into my father's office that day, my business plan bound in a leather portfolio, my hands trembling slightly with excitement. The autumn sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across the Persian rug. My father sat behind his desk, reading the Wall Street Journal, a glass of bourbon already poured even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. He glanced up briefly, then returned to his paper. "Make it quick, Penelope. I have a conference call in 20 minutes. I opened the portfolio and started explaining my vision, the market research, the projected growth of online retail, the gap I'd identified for handcrafted goods, the modest capital I needed to get started. I spoke for maybe 10 minutes, my passion pouring out with every word. When I finished, the silence that followed felt suffocating. Then my father started laughing. Not a chuckle, not a polite dismissal, but a full, mocking laugh that seemed to fill every corner of that enormous room. "You want to sell knitted scarves and homemade candles on the internet?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Penelope, honey, this is adorable, but business isn't a hobby. It's war. It's steel and sweat and ruthless competition. You think you can build something real by coddling artists and their little crafts?" I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment and anger. "Dad, the data shows..." "The data," he cut me off, closing his newspaper deliberately. "Let me give you some data, sweetheart. 90% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. And you know what percentage of those failures are run by people who don't understand that business is about power, not passion? All of them." He stood up, walking around his desk to face me directly. At 6'2", he towered over my 5'5" frame, and in that moment, I felt like a child again, but not in the way I had when I carried my pink briefcase. "You want my advice?" he continued. "Forget this fantasy. Your mother and I have been discussing it, and we think you should take a position in Hartwell's marketing department. Start at the bottom, learn the ropes. Maybe in 10 or 15 years, you'll understand what real business looks like." "I don't want to work for you," I said quietly. "I want to build something of my own." His expression hardened. "Then you'll do it without a penny from me. I don't invest in failures before they even start." I left his office that day, with tears streaming down my face, but also with something harder forming in my chest. A determination forged in humiliation. If my father wouldn't believe in me, I'd prove him wrong. I'd show him that passion could be just as powerful as ruthlessness, that there was strength in supporting others rather than crushing them. I moved out of my parents' house the following week, renting a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville with money I'd saved from summer jobs and graduation gifts. My mother called me every few days, begging me to be reasonable and come home. My father didn't call at all. I launched Creative Circle from that tiny apartment, working 18-hour days, learning HTML and basic web design from library books, cold calling artisans from craft fairs and farmers markets across Pennsylvania. I convinced 12 makers to give me a chance, a woman in Erie who made pottery, a woodworker from Lancaster, a jewelry designer from Harrisburg. I built the website myself, took all the product photos with a borrowed camera, wrote every product description, and handled every single customer service inquiry. The first month, I made $300 in sales. I celebrated with instant ramen and cheap wine. But I didn't give up. I refined the website, improved my photography, started attending craft shows in person to recruit more artisans. I learned about SEO before most people knew what those letters meant. I created email newsletters, offered personalized shopping recommendations, built relationships with both makers and customers. Creative Circle wasn't just a marketplace, it was a community. By the end of the first year, I was making enough to pay my rent and buy actual groceries. By the end of the second year, I had 75 artisans on the platform and had hired my first employee, a web developer named Marcus, who believed in the vision as much as I did. By year 5, Creative Circle was generating over $2 million in annual revenue, and we had moved into a real office space in the Strip District. During all of this, my father never once asked how the business was going. At family dinners, which I attended less and less frequently, he'd talk about Hartwell Industries' latest acquisitions or contracts, barely acknowledging my presence. When relatives asked about my little internet thing, he'd change the subject. The years passed. I got married at 30 to a kind man named Thomas who worked as an architect. We bought a modest house in Point Breeze, adopted 2 rescue dogs, and built a life that felt authentic and whole. Thomas supported my work completely, never making me feel small for choosing a different path than my father's. Creative Circle continued to grow steadily. We expanded into home goods, added a section for vintage items, developed partnerships with art schools to feature emerging talent. By my mid-40s, we were doing $20 million in annual sales and employing 30 people. We weren't Hartwell Industries, but we were successful, sustainable, and something I was genuinely proud of. My father retired when I was 47, handing the reins of Hartwell Industries over to my younger brother David, who had dutifully climbed the corporate ladder exactly as expected. David was competent, but lacked our father's ruthless instinct. He was a maintainer, not a builder. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it became a problem when the industry started shifting beneath our feet. I was 51 when I first heard whispers that Hartwell Industries was struggling. It started with a casual mention from my mother during one of our monthly lunches at a cafe in Squirrel Hill. She looked tired, older than her 76 years, and she kept stirring her coffee absently. "Your father's been stressed lately," she said quietly. "The company's having some difficulties." I felt a strange mix of concern and something darker, something that felt uncomfortably close to vindication. "What kind of difficulty?" "I don't understand all the details," she admitted. "Something about overseas competition, outdated manufacturing processes, contracts falling through. David's doing his best, but..." She trailed off, her expression pained. Over the following months, the situation worsened. Hartwell Industries lost 2 major contracts to Chinese manufacturers who could produce the same components at a fraction of the cost. An attempt to modernize their facilities stalled due to budget constraints. Employee layoffs began, first a trickle, then a flood. The company that had seemed invincible my entire life was bleeding out. My father, who still maintained an office at headquarters despite his retirement, watched his legacy crumble. According to my mother, he'd become withdrawn and bitter, drinking more, sleeping less. He refused to admit the severity of the situation, insisting it was just a temporary setback, that they'd weather the storm as they always had. But this wasn't a storm. It was a fundamental shift in how the world worked, and Hartwell Industries hadn't adapted quickly enough. I was in my office at Creative Circle, reviewing quarterly reports, when my brother called me. It was a Thursday afternoon in March, unseasonably cold, with sleet tapping against the windows. "Penelope, I need to talk to you about something," David said without preamble. His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Can we meet?" We met at a quiet bar in Shadyside, an hour later. David looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. He ordered a scotch and downed half of it before speaking. "We're in trouble," he said bluntly. "Real trouble. We've been trying to secure investment, but no one wants to touch us. The numbers are too bad. The industry outlook is too uncertain. The bank is threatening to call in our loans. If we can't find a significant capital infusion in the next 3 months, we'll have to file for bankruptcy." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. How much do you need? 12 million to stabilize, another 8 to modernize enough to be competitive. 20 million total. He laughed bitterly. Might as well be 20 billion for all the luck we've had finding it. I was quiet for a long moment, my mind racing. Creative Circle had done well, and I'd been a careful steward of its profits. We had reserves, investments, assets. I'd also received a substantial inheritance when my maternal grandmother died 5 years ago. Money I'd invested wisely. I wasn't wealthy by Hartwell standards, but I had resources. I might be able to help, I said slowly. David looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, I might be able to provide the investment you need, but I'd need to see all the books, understand exactly what we're dealing with. And David, if I do this, I can't just be a silent partner. I'd need real control, real authority to make changes. My brother stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're serious. Completely serious. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Dad's going to lose his mind. Dad lost his mind a long time ago, I replied. The question is whether you want to save the company or protect his ego. David considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Let me talk to the board. And Penelope, thank you for even considering this. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of due diligence, meetings with accountants and lawyers, and late nights reviewing decades of financial records. The situation was worse than David had initially indicated. The company wasn't just struggling, it was on life support. But I could also see potential, paths forward that no one else seemed to have considered. Hartwell Industries had always focused on traditional manufacturing, but they had infrastructure, established relationships, and a reputation for quality that still meant something. With the right pivot, integrating more technology, focusing on customization rather than mass production, developing a direct-to-consumer channel, they could survive, maybe even thrive. I put together a proposal and presented it to the board. Most of them were old friends of my father's, men in their 60s and 70s who looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. But the numbers were clear, and they were desperate. After 3 hours of intense discussion, they voted to accept my investment in exchange for a 60% ownership stake and full operational control. I became the majority owner and CEO of Hartwell Industries on a rainy Tuesday in April, 1 month before my 52nd birthday. The hardest part wasn't the board meeting or the financial restructuring or the strategic planning. The hardest part was telling my father. My mother arranged for me to come to their house on a Saturday afternoon. I drove through the familiar streets of Shadyside, past the mansions and manicured lawns of my childhood, and pulled into the circular driveway I'd once thought was the grandest thing in the world. My father was in his study. Where else would he be? Sitting in the same leather chair behind the same oak desk. He'd aged dramatically in the past year. His hair had gone completely white, his face was gaunt, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his ever-present glass of bourbon. So, he said without looking up as I entered, my daughter is here to gloat. I'm here to tell you what's happening with the company, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I know what's happening. You're taking everything I built, everything I worked for my entire life. You're stripping it away because I wouldn't fund your little hobby 30 years ago. The injustice of that characterization stung, but I'd prepared myself for this. Dad, I'm not taking anything away. I'm saving it. Without this investment, Hartwell Industries would be bankrupt within 3 months. Every employee would lose their job. Your legacy would be nothing but a cautionary tale. My legacy, he said bitterly, finally looking at me with eyes full of anger and something that looked painfully like fear. My legacy is being handed over to someone who sells candles on the internet. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To watch everything you've built become a joke? Actually, I do know what that feels like, I said quietly. I know exactly what it feels like to have someone you respect treat your life's work like a joke, to be mocked and belittled and told you'll never amount to anything. Remember, Dad? Because I do. I remember every single word you said to me in this office 29 years ago. He flinched as if I'd struck him. But here's the difference between us, I continued. When you told me I'd fail, I didn't let it destroy me. I used it. I built something real and sustainable and good. And now, that same little hobby has generated enough success that I can save your company when no one else will. This isn't salvation, he spat. This is humiliation. No, Dad, this is consequences. This is what happens when you're so convinced of your own invincibility that you refuse to adapt, refuse to listen, refuse to consider that maybe your way isn't the only way. I moved closer to his desk, placing my own portfolio. Leather, professional, full of 30 years of hard-won experience, in front of him. I have a comprehensive plan to turn Hartwell Industries around. It's going to require significant changes. Some people will resist. Maybe you'll resist. But I'm going to do it anyway, because unlike you, I actually care about the people who work there and the community that depends on those jobs. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. And Dad, I'm not doing this to gloat. I'm doing this because despite everything, despite how you treated me, I still love you. I still remember being that little girl with the pink briefcase who thought her father hung the moon. This is me trying to save what you built, even though you never tried to save what I built. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of that study, out of that house, and drove back to my real home, the modest house in Point Breeze, where Thomas was waiting with dinner and understanding. The transformation of Hartwell Industries wasn't easy. I spent the next 6 months implementing massive changes, modernizing equipment, restructuring departments, developing an online presence, creating customization options that allowed us to compete on quality rather than price. I met with every employee personally, listened to their concerns, incorporated their ideas. Some of the old guard resigned in protest. Others, after initial skepticism, became my strongest allies. Marcus, who had been with Creative Circle since the beginning, came over to lead our digital transformation. We poached a brilliant young industrial designer from a competitor. We partnered with 3 universities to create an innovation pipeline. Slowly, painfully, the company began to stabilize and then, remarkably, to grow. My father didn't speak to me for 8 months. My mother would call with updates. He was eating better, sleeping better, even leaving the house occasionally. But he refused to acknowledge my existence. I tried not to let it hurt, but of course it did. No matter how successful I became, there was still a part of me that was that 23-year-old girl, desperate for her father's approval. It was a cold January evening, nearly a year after I'd taken over Hartwell Industries, when my mother called with urgency in her voice. "Penelope, you need to come to the house. It's your father." My heart seized with panic. "Is he okay? Is it his heart?" "No, nothing like that. Just, please come." I found my father in his study once again, but this time he was standing at the window, looking out at the winter darkness. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile. On his desk was a copy of the Wall Street Journal with a headline about Hartwell Industries' remarkable turnaround. "Mom said you wanted to see me," I said from the doorway. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond. Then, without turning around, he spoke. "I read the article. They're calling you a visionary. They're saying you've revolutionized traditional manufacturing." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "I also read the employee satisfaction surveys you commissioned. 92% approval rating. We never had anything above 70% when I was running things." I waited, unsure where this was going. He finally turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. You weren't the underdog daughter I pitied or dismissed. You were stronger than I ever was, smarter than I ever gave you credit for. And I destroyed whatever relationship we could have had because I was too arrogant and too afraid to admit that you might be better at this than me." My own tears started then, years of hurt and hope and stubborn love finally breaking through. "I don't need you to say I'm better than you," I managed to say. "I just needed you to see me, to respect what I built instead of dismissing it." "I see you now," he said, his voice breaking. "God help me, I see you now, and I'm so ashamed of how blind I was." We stood there in that study where so much pain had begun, and for the first time in 3 decades, my father opened his arms. I crossed the room and let him hold me, both of us crying, both of us finally releasing the weight of years of silence and disappointment. "I'm proud of you, Penelope," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so incredibly proud of you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know, Dad, I know. That was almost a year ago now. Today, I'm 53 years old, the CEO of a thriving company, and my father is my most frequent visitor at the office. He doesn't try to run things or override my decisions. Instead, he asks questions, offers perspective when requested, and tells anyone who will listen about his daughter who saved his legacy when no one else could." Creative Circle is still running strong under Marcus's leadership, now partnered with Hartwell Industries to create a unique hybrid model of online artisan marketplace and customized manufacturing. We've created something neither company could have built alone. My relationship with my father will probably always carry scars. There are conversations we'll never get back, years of closeness we lost to his pride and my hurt. But we're building something new now, something more honest and equal. He's learning to see strength in different forms, and I'm learning that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing connection over bitterness. Last week, a young woman came to interview for an internship at Hartwell Industries. She was nervous and brilliant, clutching a portfolio full of ambitious ideas. After the interview, I walked her to the elevator. "You remind me of someone," I told her with a smile. "Don't let anyone tell you that your vision is too small or too different. The world needs people who see things differently and have the courage to build them." Her face lit up with hope and determination, and I recognized that expression. I'd worn it myself once, standing in an office not unlike the one I now commanded, refusing to let someone else's limitations define my possibilities. I was the underdog daughter who was supposed to fail, supposed to need her father's empire to mean anything. Instead, I built my own empire, and then I saved his too. And that, I've learned, is a far better legacy than invincibility ever was.